here we are with Chris Klie, our most senior level designer here. This has he's been
where is she?
Yeah, you're the oldest guy. Are you the oldest guy in the company?
I'm the oldest guy in the industry, I think.
The industry, exactly. And Chris is responsible, amongst other things, for the DS1 fantasy fulfillment level, where basically we're in the Death Star and you have to get the princess out of there. And we've got Rudolf Stember, Rudy, who is the sound designer and who you're going to listen to a little bit in one of the other missions, but who also did the recutting of the original Star Wars footage with me. So we can tell you a little bit about futzing around with the classics there. But first of all, Chris, this is one of our character levels. So obviously the camera isn't a follow cam. What was the basic thought behind the whole thing?
Well, we thought we would try to go for a more cinematic feel, to try and push the idea that you were essentially inside the movie, and thus pushing the fantasy fulfillment element.
Right.
We've been able to hopefully recreate a lot of movie experiences in the last game, in Rogue Leader, and we wanted to push that even further here in these indoor environments.
Yeah.
So our thought was to try and go with a more cinematic camera.
Because I mean, the no-brainer was really the forest stuff, which was an obvious one for a follow-up to Rogue Leader. But the character stuff was a little bit tougher decision, and also which direction to go in with it. Because of course we could have taken the Shadows of the Empire straight follow cam approach. I don't think anybody thought about first person, right? Because first person kind of feels completely different. The craft are also not first person. Nothing is first person really in the Rogue Leader games. But by going to the cinematic cameras, what's the biggest problem in your mind?
Yeah, I think it's really tricky to try to blend cinematic cameras, or I should say to introduce cinematic cameras into a game environment. It's difficult to anticipate what the player might do at a given time, what he may want to see at any given time, and still create a cinematic feel. Those goals at times felt incompatible, and struggling with those two was interesting. But
yeah, I think one of the interesting things which we found out during the process was initially we looked at, I think Lord of the Rings wasn't out by the time, but we looked at Devil May Cry, which is probably the first game which tried it, right?
Yeah.
One of the things which we found later on with with Devil May Cry, and arguably even they had problems in Devil May Cry 2, which was a significantly worse game than Devil May Cry 1. But nevertheless, we found out that, well, one of the things we didn't realize was Devil May Cry's melee combat. Lord of the Rings is melee combat too. So for melee combat, I think it's relatively easy actually to pull off the cinematic camera, because you have a very contained scenario. You're not fighting over long distances. Well, this is Star Wars, so basically you're shooting, and I think that's where the tricky part really came in, to merge the cinematic camera approach with the fact that we're shooting, and shooting sometimes at very small enemies on screen, and where basically you do not engage in a directly melee situation.
Yeah, we try to solve some problems with cameras that I've really not seen many others in the industry solve. Like, for example, in other games that have controlled cameras, oftentimes if the main player character opens a door and enters a doorway, the screen will fade to black, and then will fade back up inside the next room, which in and of itself is a small contained environment. And it's a lot easier to get control of cameras the smaller, the more contained your environment is. And what we try to do is not remove the player so much from the experience, and we try to keep the flow, even though the player would be going through a doorway into a new hallway, new room, what have you. We want to maintain that consistency, and sometimes we'd have the camera follow the player into a new room. Other times, as was the case with Death Star, we have camera cuts. But either way, we didn't want to do the fade down, fade up trick.
Speaking about the movies, I mean, one of the biggest things here, which we didn't have in Rogue Leader, of course, is that we finally have sequences from the real movies, which we were lucky enough to get due to having worked so long with the trilogy, actually, because normally this is the Holy Grail, and they don't give it out. Lucasfilm simply doesn't give it out. LucasArts internally, for example, doesn't have the original trilogy. So what we basically set out on very early on in the development process was convince them that we somehow needed the movies which then led to Lucasfilm actually giving us the complete trilogy and saying in single frame actually. So we've got the movies frame per frame.
Yes.
And then sitting down in conjunction with the levels to actually cut it. And Rudy, what's fun or what's not fun about recutting George Lucas?
What's not fun actually was that we got the movies all in single frames. So we had about 1 terabyte of data on our server. And then looking through that, it's not very fluent. If you have single frames, so finding a scene is not fun. It's just a huge amount of data you have to deal with. What was fun was just to make those movie cutscenes shorter and shorter and shorter. So we
if people think, since we're here in the DS1, if people think that this is basically how they remember these scenes, it's not scenes. No, we've completely recut the whole thing.
Yes.
We just screwed so badly.
I'm
with
convinced I can cut the whole New Hope episode movie in 10 minutes.
Easily. Yep. Was it fun? Would you do it again, screwing around with the original movies?
Oh yeah, exactly. I would do it again anytime. I mean, now that we're at the end of the project, I'm kind of sad that we don't have any more movie cutscenes in there, because they really work. Also on the sound effect side, because I can put sound effects in there, and yeah, you have the movie playing, and then the animated cutscenes. Well, the sound effects not always work,
Right.
because they're programmed. But yeah, I would definitely do it again.